If you just logged in and were wondering where your Retaliation went, you may want to check out the latest balance patch notes. Of course, those will be linked in the description below if you wish to read along. I'll be summarizing the meaningful changes and how that may manifest in the meta. So first of all, Retaliation is being changed to Resolution. Every instance of Retaliation will now give Resolution instead. Resolution is basically protection but against damaging conditions. So instead of doing damage to people who hit you, you'll be gaining resilience to condition damage. I use the word resilience there very carefully because to understand this change, you also need to know its interaction with the change to resistance. So resistance is also being changed to make non-damaging conditions ineffective instead of all conditions. They'll be increasing some resistance durations, but for the most part this is a big nerf because it'll only affect conditions like weakness, blind, movement inhibiting conditions, and such. Along with those changes to 2 boons, Torment is being inverted mechanically. So you used to take double damage while moving with Torment, but now you will take double damage when standing still with Torment. Overall, this is a nerf because you have much more control for counterplay to Torment. However, this and many other changes you'll see kind of feel like they were intended for PvE, since you can often make PvE mobs stand still. You can still CC people with Torment on them, and for example the Core Necro Shroud 5 gave Torment and then it immobilized at the end, so it had some weird anti-synergy. So some skills will still kind of work and even work better. Condi Revs also usually spammed a lot of CCs while also using their AoE pulsing Torment. So there's still a lot of opportunity for Torment to be used in PvP, and it will still be good. But it feels like the better opportunity for counterplay is much better. Now that we've gone over all the boon and condition changes, let's go back to Resolution and Resistance. So let's start out with Guardians. Guardians are going to see the most change due to this because certain builds had almost permanent Retaliation uptime. If you think that this is a buff to Guardians because they're going to be so tanky and resilient to boons, you may be wrong. They aren't just gaining Resolution, they're losing Retaliation in return, which was a very strong boon for counter pressuring and adding supplemental damage. It was never your main source, but you will definitely feel the difference. For example, the Core Support Guardian build does almost no damage already. Without Retaliation, you'll do next to nothing. Retaliation adds up quite a bit when trying to kill something that tanky, and for example, if you're trying to chase someone down and it takes a while for you to kill them, you may lose enough health that you'll have to use your heal skill, and then say you don't have your heal skill and then the situation changes and now you need your heal skill, but you just used it based on just hitting Retaliation. So it can result in your death. Just because you don't get downed by the Retaliation doesn't mean it can't pressure you and force your cooldowns, which eventually lead to a situation where you can be killed. Retaliation was a very strong boon, and I think on a glass like Guardian that already handled conditions very well, you're going to feel it's weaker with Resolution than with Retaliation. For Firebrands who were weak to conditions but had lots of Retaliation sources, it could be considered a buff, but at the same time the resistance from the Protection Tome is nerfed, so it may be a net neutral change. Because there are already traits in the game that give condition damage reduction, they can be stacked together with Resolution to allow you to ignore Condition Cleanse. For example, Soul Beasts get condition damage reduction while they have Protection, Dash Daredevils, Renegades, and Death Magic Necros also. Because of these changes, Light Aura is also changing drastically because it used to give Retaliation, now it's going to give Resolution, and it also gave a passive condition damage reduction, so now it gives condition damage reduction and Resolution, which is also more condition damage reduction. And they're not going to really stack additively, so it's probably going to be somewhere in between like 30 to 40-ish condition damage reduction from Light Aura, but you'd still be affected by non-damaging conditions, right? Because it only affects the damage of conditions. So I highly doubt a build that can gain high amounts of resolution and other condition damage reduction sources will feel good because you'll still get debilitated by other conditions. Nothing beats the ability to cleanse conditions, and I feel that resolution will merely be a supplemental boon rather than a build-defining boon. Radiance Guardians, which specialize in using Retaliation before the change, will see the biggest change because they'll lose a lot of their damage from Retaliation. Next is the Mantra Chain. Instead of having to charge your mantra to gain the ability to use its charges, you'll just be able to use the charges as if it was a normal count recharge ability. This also means that for Firebrands, the final charge will not be stronger because there is no final charge. For example, the Cleanse Mantra gave a 5 condition conversion to boons on the final charge. This was massive because it not only gave you those conditions to boons, but it was also for allies. The other mantras were not that powerful on the final charge, but for Mesmers, there are some definite detractions. Charging the mantra also gave some benefits depending on which skill, and because the cooldown of the mantra was shorter than the count recharge of the mantras, it was always worth it to use the final mantra on Mesmers. Now that they don't recharge, Mesmers have had their mantras increased in cooldown by default and removed some of the benefits. For the Daze mantra, it reduced the cooldown of Diversion, which was the Daze Shatter, so there's a lot less dazes there. For the Power mantra, it gave 15 might on charging, so you'll see a lot less one-shot from stealth mantra Mesmers. And the other mantras were often too clunky to gain too much value from their benefits, but basically mantras were made less risky and less rewarding. Overall, I think it's a bad change in my opinion, but playing around instant cast abilities, even if they needed to be charged first, was never that engaging. So some general changes include some PvE stuff like break bars giving more damage bonuses to conditions than to power, so condition builds will want to stack on their condies and then break the bar, while power builds will still want to CC normally and then use their burst. Also, the Celestial stat is being buffed to include some concentration and expertise, or in other words, boon duration and condition duration, which is very good for hybrid builds. I like more hybrid incentives, but Celestial is one of the least interesting and more powerful hybrid stat types. So it's kind of a trade-off. We're probably not going to enjoy seeing a lot of Selly builds. We will be interested in seeing more hybrid builds, but the version of those builds might be tankier than we really like to see with the Celestial stat type. Either way, I think it's a good change. Elementalist is basically getting 0 changes. There's like more hybridization from the Weaver trait line, Elements of Rage. A little bit of a nerf to Lightning Orb, which honestly I kind of liked, but that's kind of sad, but it's only in PvE. You'll still see a lot of Fire Weaver because that's going to be a good build, especially in a meta where there's going to be a lot of condies, because resolution, while it's okay, it's not going to be making up for resistance. So Fire Weaver is a good counter to condi builds. Engineer is losing the self knockback on Rifle, which, while I like Rifle over Sword Shield because the shield is just not really that counterplayable, the knockback on Rifle is one of the most obnoxious skills. I think this change should have come with a cooldown increase on the skill personally, but we'll see where it goes from there. Kinetic stabilizers used to be whenever you disabled an enemy, you gained super speed and stability. With Flashbang and many other CCs, this made Scrapper really annoying to try to catch. Now it's been changed to kinetic accelerators, and that will give quickness to allies that you give super speed to. There's a little bit of synergy here with Zephyrite Rune and Mortar Kit to give a bunch of quickness to allies, and I'm sure that some kind of build like this will be created, but it feels like it wouldn't be a better option than a Firebrand, which doesn't need to invest in super speed and can be casting all of their other skills while giving out the quickness. Applied Force will also be changed from Might giving quickness to Might giving stability, This is a nice change because it forces scrappers to go more aggressive to get their stability, which will also be limited by the internal cooldown of 10 seconds. So permanent stability will be less of a thing, or at least on builds that will have other weak points to it. So generally a good change. You'll probably see a lot of Hollow still because they didn't really get nerfed. Prot Hollow is really good versus conditions, and just the Grenade Hollow didn't really get nerfed at all. So those are still going to be really good and probably one of the best builds to play. Scrapper is probably not going to be as good as it used to be because its main benefit was that it was so tanky and had a lot of stability, and now that's been kind of like reduced. It's not going to have the advantage that it has over Hollow, and while it still has some stability, Hollow's advantages are going to be a lot better. So I think this is going to be a Hollow patch for sure. Then you have Guardians. So Guardian is getting some minor changes here and there to symbol cooldowns, but some interesting changes to consecrations. Purging Flames will now pulse burning of a small stack and duration to enemies within it, instead of a long duration 2 stack to enemies who pass through it. Generally a buff, but also less counterplay to it. Just remember that when you see this animation, you no longer are safe inside it, and you don't need to dodge through the edges, just get out. It will also do a small packet of damage, so it's going to be proccing out Permeating Wrath at the same time. So in large situations of like cleaves or team fights, this skill is going to be insane. You really want to watch for this animation and don't be anywhere near it, because this is going to be the OP build for right now until they nerf it, or I don't know. Zeal Condi builds will generally be nerfed because the Eternal Armory and Symbolic Power traits are essentially changed to scale less. Spirit Weapons, while traded, will only give 1 burn stack per cast instead of each hit. Symbolic Power will only trigger 1 stack of your passive on symbols instead of 2, so it's less burn scaling up. So you won't see those huge burns from Zeal Guardians anymore. What this means is that the true best Condi DH build, the Diseased Dragon, will reign supreme as it always has. Build link below in the description. Hunter's Ward, the 5 skill on DH, the longbow, is going to be a much faster cast time, but once it's finished, the barrage continues as normally, which means much more mobility on DHs and much less counterplay. Honestly, that's a bad change in my opinion. And of course, the mantra changes from above will apply to Firebrands. I think you'll be seeing a lot of longbow dragon hunters and a lot of burn dragon hunters. This isn't really too much of a Firebrand meta. Support Core Guardian could still exist, but yeah, you won't see a lot of those like core or DPS Guardians because the retail was kind of a hard nerf to them. So yeah, this is the patch of the Dragon Hunter. Mesmers are getting pretty big nerfs to the Chronomancer for PvE DPS, and the mantra changes mentioned above will apply. The big changes to Mesmer come from the Chaos trait line and the staff. Before, the bouncing staff skill used to give 3 conditions: bleeding, torment, and burning. This was pretty good because it put out a variety of damaging conditions. Now it will be a bit faster, but instead give torment on the first hit and confuse each subsequent bounce. In general, this means much more counterplay against staff builds because they can't really kill you if you choose to walk away, especially since torment is less while moving now. And the Chaos trait line will give better regeneration and condition synergy, but for the most part it's still going to be passive. Another interesting thing is that they've decoupled the staff trait from the Chaos armor trait. So now you can choose to take the staff trait, which gives extra condition damage and reduction to staff skill, or the Chaos armor trait, which gives extra protection and regeneration, which is nice because then you have to choose between being tanky or having that condition damage and the cooldown reduction. But I generally think that people aren't going to want to take this new staff trait because staff isn't that kind of weapon. It's not like a burst weapon, it's a sustainable 1v1 weapon. So I think that they're going to go for the tankier traits in Chaos. And then another thing is whenever you use the ambush skill on staff, you give alacrity for 3 seconds to nearby allies. This is really good because Alacrity is really strong, and you're always using your ambush skill on staff, so you've got a lot of Alacrity uptime, and it's going to just allow you to spam all your skills out. So I feel like a Chaos Staff Mirage is going to be pretty playable. You'll just go as tanky as possible, you take Infinite Horizon, and then you just spam your dodge, and they basically make Mesmer playable again because they've made it an easy to play class. Necromancers are losing the ability to shoot Ghastly Claws or the big damaging skill while in Lich form from behind them. This is a nice change because it not only makes them more vulnerable, since they can't as easily kite while doing damage, and in situations where the Lich is just pressing W on you and there's no terrain to hide behind nearby, you can still try to run around back behind them. Though it's not recommended you run straight at a Lich. Blood Bank is also being changed to not be useless. Before, it only gave barrier when you were full HP, which meant it gave you barrier when you didn't need it. Now it will give 100% of the healing you gain at full HP, and 15% of the healing you gain as barrier when below 100% HP. Combined with the Sanctuary Rune, which has the same effect and can give quite a large amount of barrier, I could definitely see a Duelist Necro build coming out of it. However, Unholy Martyr is way better in many more situations because it helps you to support your team, cleanse conditions on yourself, gives you Shroud generation, and it even has synergy with condition transfer and curses. I think Blood Bank is not that good when you have to choose between that and Unholy Martyr. Ranger isn't getting much except the Warhorn 5 Call of the Wild is going to give an AoE daze. Now this is not going to be affected by the swap skill on the pet from the, I believe it's Marksmanship trait line. Revenant will get more synergy from hybridity in Invocation, Devastation, and Renegade passives. Also, many of the Retaliation sources they had will become Resolution, which could be considered a buff because unlike Guardians who would rather prefer Retaliation, Revenants probably benefit more from the condition damage reduction. Renegades who use the Jalis legend will have many sources of the new Resolution boon, which will benefit them a lot because they also have the one trait that also reduces the condition damage taken when they have Callous Fervor. So a build that already had low condition cleanse on it is now going to get condition damage reduction on it. So the whole argument of cleanses are better doesn't really apply here because they can't really get cleanses very easily. So Renegade is getting massively buffed because it's getting the condition damage reduction, and Condi Herald is kind of getting nerfed because you don't have the security of that perma resistance. You will still be able to get resolution, and you'll need cleanse on Condi Herald now, and Power Herald will still be fine, but I think that most people are probably going to be playing Power Renegade. It's kind of unfortunate because Power Renegade with the short bow is probably one of the easier to play and the lower risk builds that you can play on a Revenant. Thieves had some great changes for Deadly Arts. Improvisation was reduced to a 15-second cooldown because often 20 seconds was longer than the actual cooldown of Steel on Acrobatic Sword or Daredevil builds. It's a nice quality of life. Also, Wild Strike will give a stack of bleed, which for Dagger Deadly Arts Thieves will add 2% more damage because it's an extra Condi to their auto chain. And they added a reveal to Deadeye when using Binding Shadow, so there's actually a clear animation you can avoid, so no more stealth knockdowns. Then there are some big changes to Condi Thieves. The Confusion on Steel is being removed and replaced with Bleeding on Steel, and then 25% more damage on your bleeds. Then, Shortbow Auto Trick Shot will no longer deal increased damage to poison enemies, but will give bleeding instead. This opens up a lot more build diversity for Condition Thieves, because they don't just go for one-trick wonders with the Confusion during their Steel Burst, which prevented players from reacting, or they just get destroyed by the Confusion. So Condi Thieves will take a much more sustained damage approach now, which we can all agree is much more healthy. I just wish Shadow Arts was removing the sustain that Shadow Rejuvenation gave. It's such a passive trait and it ruins all the good design that's gone on and the rest of the trait line in the recent past. If Shadow Arts could get its sustain only from lifesteal, it would be way more active and not promote the perma-stealth playstyle. And obviously getting stealth on your heal skill and on steel should probably not exist. Warriors get some rifle changes that aren't too interesting. They should be slight buffs to the other sources of damage than just the burst skill. But one interesting change is that warrior banners no longer perform a blast when summoned, but will instead create a light field. We know that the light fields when blast will give condition cleanse and when leap through will give light aura, which gives resolve now. We know that warrior has never had access to retaliation other than through the passive defense trait, which also gives them damage reduction while they have retaliation on them. So now this damage reduction comes from resolution, which can be accessed from light auras from banners? I don't think it'll become useful, but this is what it looks like ANET was thinking. So my prediction of the classes you'll see and the roles they're going to play, you'll generally see all kinds of Necros, Scourges, the very tanky with Transfusion, and the Boon Corrupts with Feast of Corruption, and you've also got Reapers probably. You'll see those in team fights. All kinds of Dragon Hunters will exist, the Burn Dragon Hunter and the Longbow Trap with the really high power coefficients. You'll see those in team fights. The Power Herald probably is not a very decent roamer anymore because it really needs a lot of support. So you'll probably still see them because they do tons of damage, and the lifesteal buffs are going to help it to survive in larger situations where it already kind of has support. But as a roamer, it's probably not going to be that good. And Condi Herald, you're probably not going to see that much anymore anyways, which in my opinion is probably a good thing. For supports, you'll probably see Tempests and Core Guardians, pretty much the same as it was before patch. Duelists, you'll see Prot Hollows as probably the best duelist because it's just the most survivable and it has protection and it has Condi Cleanse, so it pretty much deals with everything. And there's also going to be Fire Weavers, even though that kind of gets countered by Prot Hollow, it will still be very good. And of course Rangers, any kind of like Condi Soul Beast, Core Ranger, those are going to be good. Strength Spellbreaker is also a decent duelist build. It's probably going to have good matchups versus the Prot Hollow and any kind of like Ranger build, but it is going to be weak to like a Fire Weaver or a Condi Mirage. The Condi Mirage, haven't really tested it that much, but I think that it's going to be viable as a duelist more so than a roamer, just using the staff with the Chaos trait line now. And the new Alacrity that they're going to get, I think is going to be super strong. So I think that Mirage will pop up as a duelist rather than a roamer. And the roamers, probably going to just be Thief, Condi Thief, Shadow Arts Dagger, Pistol Daredevil, and probably some Core SD Thief, because if you're going to be seeing a lot more Dragon Hunters nowadays, SD Thief is really good versus that. And of course the Power Renegade is probably going to be one of the best roamers because it's been buffed, it already was really good, and it's a super safe option. So yeah, you'll probably see maybe like a Soul Beast here and there as a roamer, but I wouldn't say that that's like optimal. So yeah, that's what you're gonna see most likely. So if you like this kind of video, give it a like and subscribe for more. Consider becoming a patron, I would really appreciate that, and just support me by sharing this video, and I will see you guys next time.